Genius Kids. Cultivating love for learning.
Lesson 4. The Vedic Culture. Knowledge Acquisition. We have learnt in the previous chapter that the early man learned to live in groups. Gradually, they knew the importance of life. The first such groups of people were called Aryans. The Vedic culture was developed by the Aryans. The literature of the Aryans. The Aryans believed that the Veds were the words of God. The Veds contain a great deal of wisdom and information. There are 4 types of Veds: Rig Ved, Sam Ved, Yajur Ved and Atharv Ved. The earliest, namely the Rig Ved, was composed about 1500 BC. It is a collection of 1028 hymns. These hymns were composed in praise of the gods and goddesses by sages, rishis. The Upanishads or the Vedanta contains the views of great sons. Since common people were not able to understand the Veds and Upanishads, new explanatory notebooks were written in simple prose. A detailed picture of the Vedic people was furnished by the Brahmins. This period of Indian history is known as the Vedic age because Vedic texts are the main source of information about this age. Later on, archaeologists also found some distinctive vessels made of clay dating back to this age. Hence, now it is possible to use both literary and archaeological sources to study the history of the Vedic age. The Aryans. The word Arya, as implied by in the Sanskrit language, means noble and freeborn. The Aryan people were men of noble character and high ideals. Coming of the Aryans to India. The Aryans spread to different parts of the world from their original home in Central Asia. Those who came to India are called Indo-Aryans. Do you know? There are 108 Upanishads and 18 Purans. They came to India sometime between 2000 BC and 1500 BC. They were pastoral people. They migrated from their original home because of 1. The increase in their numbers, 2. The search for new grasslands, and 3. The changing climate of Central Asian region. Spread of the Aryans. From the Saptasindhu, where the Aryans settled first, they moved eastwards into the river valleys of the Ganga and the Yamuna, north of Delhi, where a river called Saraswati then flowed. It has since dried up. Here they stayed for quite a long period, composing the hymns of the Rig Ved. In due course, this area came to be known as Kurukshetra, where the great battle of Mahabharat between the Kauravas and the Pandavas is said to have taken place. Thereafter, they moved eastwards into the Ganga valley. They cleared the thick forests, burning and cutting them down with their iron axes. Iron was a new discovery. We know that the Indus people used copper and bronze, but the Aryans used iron. This is the contribution of the Aryans to human civilization. It is around this time that iron also came into use in Western Asia and Europe too. The Iron Age was brought in by the Aryans in India. The central Gangetic plain was called the Madhya Desha. The Aryans continued their eastward march till they reached the Bay of Bengal and moved up to the northeastern region, the whole of Uttar Patha. The landmass between the Himalayas and the Vindhyas, and from the western sea to the east, was named Aryavrat. Political organization. More and more Aryan tribes were pouring into the country. These tribes fought with each other over grasslands. Each tribe had its king, also called Rajan or chief, who would lead the tribe in these fights. Therefore, only a strong and brave man was selected as a king. During later Vedic period, kingship became hereditary. When a king died, his son became his successor or the new king. The king ruled with the help of a number of people. There was a commander of the army who was called Senani. The Purohit or priest performed religious ceremonies for the king and gave advice in important matters. In order to remain in touch with the tribesmen living in neighboring villages, the king had messengers. The headmen of villages, Brahmins of grams or villages, of his tribe used to advise the king. But when it came to matters of the utmost importance, the king would seek the advice of the entire tribe. Sabha and Samiti. There were two institutions, Sabha and Samiti, to check the powers of the king. Samiti was the national committee of the whole tribe. All important issues were discussed in it. Anyone could speak out his mind about the problem. The Sabha appears to have been a small assembly. Selected people took part in its meetings. Several tribal assemblies such as Sabha, Samiti, Vidita, Gena are mentioned in Rig Veda. The family. Most of the families were joint families. People took the family as the smallest. Administrative unit. The power of the king grew enormously. The eldest male member of the family was the head of the family. He was called Grihapati. All powers of the family were vested in him. He made all the decisions, and other family members had to accept his decision. Women also had an important place in the family and society. The family unit was a joint family. Even after their marriage, sons lived with their father. The village. A group of families living together formed a village. The tribe was spread over many villages. The village was called Gram. In the beginning, villages were small in size. But when people gave up the nomadic way of life and took to agriculture, villages became larger. The village was divided into families. Cattle, horses and chariots. The early man took keen interest in growing barley crop, which was used in religious functions. Wheat and rice were also grown. Elephants, buffaloes, antelopes and boars were hunted. The cow was the most important animal. It gave milk, cow dung used for manuring fields and for plastering houses, and the young bulls were used for plowing fields. The cow was regarded as next to money because of its great economic value, and also for the milk it produced, which was very beneficial for health. A man's life was valued as being equal to 100 cows. If a man killed another man, he had to pay a penalty of 100 cows. Horse was another important animal. Aryans had brought horses with them. The best horses were from Central Asia. Horses drew chariots. Chariots were light, two-wheeled cart pulled by one or more horses. They were a means of fast transport and were thus useful in battle. Kings and army commanders fought from chariots. A chariot maker was therefore held in high esteem. The chariot became a status symbol in later periods. Kings in later periods drove chariots or rode on elephants. Chariot racing was the favorite pastime for people of high rank. Life of the people, the Dasyus and the Aryans. Before the arrival of the Aryans, the Dasyus were the natives of India. They spoke a language different from Vedic Sanskrit. They worshipped different gods. The Aryans called these people Das and were very hostile to them. They made them slaves. The Das, whom the Aryans had made slaves, had to do the most difficult and lowly type of work. However, some of the Das chiefs were treated with great respect. Society. Early Vedic society was a relatively advanced civilization based on a settled way of life and a well-organized social system with the passage of time. Three groups emerged in Aryan society. Kings and their warriors were the most powerful group. They were called Kshatriyas. The group of priests or Brahmins was also equally important. Then came the craftsmen, traders and cultivators. They were called Vaishyas. With the passage of time, a fourth group came into being. This consisted of Das, who did all the menial work. They were looked down upon by the other three groups. They were also known as Shudras. They had an inferior position in society. The Brahmins held a respectable position in society. They performed religious rituals called yajnas. The Kshatriyas were also greatly respected. Earlier, a boy was free to choose his occupation. But later on, it became the custom of a son to do the same work as his father. According to the religious texts, each man passes through 4 stages or ashrams in his life. These are brahmacharya or student life, grahast or life of a householder, husband and father, vanaprasthan or life of a hermit, and finally, sannyas or complete renunciation of all worldly pleasures. Food and dress. Aryans ate rice, fish and fruits. Their favorite drinks were madhu, sura and soma. Sura was an intoxicating drink. Soma was also a mild intoxicating beverage. Difficult to prepare, it was mostly consumed during religious ceremonies. In totality, the food of the Aryans was simple but nourishing. The Aryans wore dresses almost similar to those of the Harappans. Their dress consisted of 2 clothes. They covered their heads with a turban. Another garment that touched their ankles was also in use. The rich wore clothes with golden thread embroidery. Women wore ornaments such as rings, earrings, and necklaces. These were made of gold or other metals. Women also wore beads, worn in various designs and fashions. Occupations. Agriculture was the chief occupation of the Aryans. Apart from agriculture, other occupations were cattle rearing, fishing, metal work, carpentry, and tanning. Iron had been discovered in India a little before 1000 BC in India. Weapons and tools were made of iron, copper or bronze, but iron was the most preferred since it was a hard, strong metal. The work of teaching was carried out by the priests. Education was only for the higher classes. Students lived with their gurus in separate schools called gurukuls. They had to memorize and recite the Vedic hymns. The priests were invited to perform big ceremonies. Kings performed big sacrifices that lasted for many days. The entire tribe took part in these rituals. Priests were also doctors in their villages. They were the ones who knew the secrets of medicinal herbs and plants, and they prevented the diseases or cured them. Do you know? The Gayatri Mantra and many other mantras that we recite today while praying were composed in the Vedic age. Religion. To begin with, the Aryan religion was simple, but became more and more complex over time. They worshipped nature and offered sacrifices to their gods. The worship of nature, the various forces of nature were worshipped by the Aryans. Their gods and goddesses were the sky, the sun, the stars, the moon, the earth, the wind, the trees, the rivers, and the mountains. Each had a name. Indra was the god of thunder and rain, the god of strength, and the vanquisher of the Aryans' enemies. Agni was the god of fire. The name is similar to igneous, the Latin word for fire. Agni was always worshipped by adding huge quantities of ghee, a cooking fat made from cow's milk. The god of fire dominated all domestic rituals. All sacred rites, including marriages, were performed in his presence. Surya was the sun god. Usha was the goddess of the dawn. Aryans performed sacrifices to please a particular god or goddess. Megalithic culture. From this age, big stones have been found, sculptured or chipped into different shapes. Megalith literally means a huge stone. This culture is called megalithic culture. Large stones were specially placed to mark burial sites, one of the outstanding features of the Iron Age. There are a variety of megaliths, made from simple slab placed upright in the ground, to rock-cut caves. Megaliths give us a lot of information about the kind of lives people led. Burial practices were similar in different parts of India. The dead were buried with distinctive pots, which are known as black and red ware. Sometimes, a body was buried with ornaments, tools and pet animals like hares. Different types of ornaments have been found in a grave in Brahmagiri. Sometimes, there was more than one skeleton in a grave. In Inamgaon, graves have been found inside houses. India, the Northeast and Kashmir. From excavations at megalithic sites, it is clear that these people were familiar with iron and used it for making weapons and implements. They had complex ideas about life and death and had elaborate burial rituals. They were herdsmen and cultivators. They wore ornaments made of beads and gold. They traveled on horses and carried on trade with far-off places. Beads, precious stones, and gold were items of exchange. Chalcolithic culture. As we know, copper was first metal used by the early men. This culture, which used copper, is known as a Chalcolithic culture. Such cultures flourished in India between 4000 and 800 BC. The Chalcolithic people were primarily rural communities. They were spread over a wide area in those parts of the country where there were hills and rivers. They worshipped the mother goddess, the bull, Rudra, Shiva, Pashupti, Ganesh, Lakshmi and fire. They also believed in life after death. Chalcolithic culture people used a distinctive type of pottery. They were also experts in making copper tools and weapons, ornaments of various kinds, and terracotta figurines. The work of spinning and weaving cloth was carried out by them very skillfully. Keywords: Grihapati, head of the family; Soma and Sura, drinks consumed by the Aryans; Sabha and Samiti, institutions to check the power of the king. Let's revise. Continuous review. The Aryans developed Vedic culture. Rig Ved, Sam Ved, Yajur Ved and Atharva Ved are four main Veds. Aryan society was divided into four classes: Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. Sabha and Samiti were the institution to check the powers of the king. The Aryans worshipped nature gods. Yagnas or sacrifices were performed to please the gods. Pit burials have been found at Neolithic and Chalcolithic sites.
Like, share and subscribe.